The other thing that came to me is, and let me quickly show you a video. If you can just like put that on in the background, rolling, just to get an idea of. So this is like very similar to how I'm used to working in a design firm context. Do you have the video up?
It's coming.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Oh, great. Uh-huh.
I mean, you've probably seen stuff like this
Like
before, right?
IDEO, I saw their kind of
Yeah,
work
yeah.
before.
So the workplace I work for, basically my entire career is a design firm, very much similar to IDEO. And the way we always have meetings is we have like the entire wall is like foam core boards, and everybody can write and put post-it notes up and draw and do all these things as the meeting is progressing. And this room is a dedicated project room that lasts for months, and we can always come back in here. And the moment we see these things up on the walls, all the memories from the previous meeting comes rushing right back in, and the context is sort of like rooted in this physical space, right? I mean, there's all the research about situated learning and sort of situated cognition, where the space plays a huge role in your ability to think and your ability to sort of like conjure up memories related to that space, so you can actually flow back into that moment in time,
Yeah.
as opposed to sort of just like having disjointed meetings when you're constantly trying to reestablish context. So again, this is very difficult to do online, but one thing we could probably do is maybe, everybody has a sheet of paper, kind of like, um, let's see, kind of like this.
Mm-hmm.
And whether again, maybe there has to be a dedicated documentarian who is really diligently doing this. But if everybody has a piece of paper and they say, oh, so Edwin, so you're saying when you said the word worked well, which I wrote down here, what you omit was technically. Oh, I didn't understand that. So when you say technically, you really meant syncing audio and video, and also the video quality. Is that right? And you're like, oh yeah, you're nodding, right?
Uh-huh.
Then I say, okay, well, let's make sure that this is part of the model. So whenever somebody says worked well, there are technically working well, and there are other kinds of working well as well. And this is not just a quick scribble, but like it becomes part of the model that we build. It is the model of what the shared understanding we have of the entire conversation. This is not irrelevant to building a culture of empathy, because this in and of itself is probably a component of that. Because say we need to build, well, what does it mean to build something? Well, there's technical aspects of building. Oh yeah, we talked about that. We have, in order to build this better, the panel is part of it. The panel needs this done and that done. So it becomes, again, a model that's growing and growing from one panel to another, that hopefully is sort of like a part of the framework, right?
Yeah.
Like there's all building blocks being put into place. So one person does this quick sketch, but there's another person who is integrating all these things into a much bigger model. Because it's probably impossible to say, well, we'll all scan these papers in at the end of the meeting, and then somebody's going to go off into a dark room and print all these things out and put it, like, it's unlikely for that to happen. So probably somebody who's dedicated whose job is to really integrate all these ideas into a much more cohesive model. And this is not just somebody who types or sort of like dictates or write things down verbatim, because it's a kind of a creative act, because they have to make connections between these disparate things, this one little technical nugget, to something somebody else talks about, empathy. How does this relate to empathy? They have to be able to draw those lines and maybe, again, show it back to the group and says, you know what, I just made a connection between this one little information we talked about 20 minutes ago and we just talked about. And everybody goes like, oh, wow, I didn't make that connection. That wasn't obvious to me. Well, now that you've shown me that connection, it's actually given me a whole new perspective on what it is that we're just now talking about. Why don't we bring that in? Like, it's kind of like an evolving kind of, it's a sculpting experience that somehow is shared at a higher resolution when somebody's dedicated to doing this.
Yeah, that's great. The when you were talking about that, it reminded me of a little bit of this. Let me see, just coming through. This link here, this was a presentation I did at UC Berkeley at a class that was in the conflict resolution, peace and conflict resolution. And what we had is the students all did drawings, like just drawings of metaphors of empathy. So it's a little along those lines, starting to get the images, and I put it all into one page, but it doesn't have all the connections and all that kind of stuff that you're talking about. But it's somehow, how do you create an online space? I've seen actually like museums, which are online museums, and you kind of walk through the space and you can post stuff within the walls. And
sure.
So those are...
yeah. Absolutely.
There's all kinds of, like, how do you kind of set that up? So, yeah, so it's having a dedicated facilitator and then a dedicated documentarian who kind of, who captures what's going on online or on paper.
I just sent you a quick link to, you're probably familiar with concept maps, right?
Yeah, like mind mapping, or is that, let's see.
Well, a little different from mind mapping. Mind mapping is sort of like what you're thinking about, and you're just like spreading it out.
Yeah.
Concept map is a little more rigorous in the sense that you're really trying to, you're really trying to model what it is that you're talking about. The relationship between two concepts is much more important than the individual nuggets. Because throwing around words is very easy. Like I can say empathy this, empathy that, resonance this, compassion that. But unless people see the relationship between those words and maybe the stories or the pictures, the relationship is what gives meaning to them. So the concept map really focuses on what kind of relationship do we draw between these things? Is it that this is this, or is it's like this, or this is a part of this? Or is this an example of this? What are we talking about? How do we really model this in such a way that everybody can understand relationships? And I'm showing you this because it's a simpler way for the documentarian to document, because it really doesn't require a whole lot of visual skills. Although that would be extremely awesome to have. Because all this is words with squares or circles around them, and then other words. But the point is that the person has to really think hard about what the relationship between the words. And they might ask you back questions. Is relationship? Or are you saying that this is in conjunction with this, mix this other thing, or what are you really saying? So it's more of that way. It's a different way of modeling. When you have less drawing skills, this tends to help a lot of people who are still trying to model but lack the visual fidelity, so to speak. So there are different ways of modeling, this being one of them. I found this to be pretty helpful because, again, this can grow because it can just imagine it sort of having more concepts thrown in and more nuances. And somebody can actually, it's easy to clean this up because if it gets really unwieldy, if you don't clean it up after a while, but one session will have something. And if everybody sort of looks at this and go yeah, that's what we talked about. You're right. And it sort of gave us a new insight into what we're really trying to say. And then you just clean up the lines because the lines get all messy. But I'm sure there's computer tools that can clean up lines relatively quickly. And then you have a nice clean diagram that you can distribute out or to the panelists. Or if you want to use it as a framework for another panel, you can give them this, and then they can build on that and say really hone in on are there any new concepts that this diagram hasn't addressed that should be, and then if that new concept gets introduced, well, how does that new concept relate to all the different concepts that have been thrown out so far? Yeah. So another way of kind of sculpting the experience.
Yeah, it's how do you create? It's almost like a world, right? You want to kind of create a world and so that someone else can kind of like step into that world and just kind of feel it and see it all around them, and experience it. What? And
basically empathizing.
Empathize with what they've already said, and making it very easy to just step into that world.
Yeah. I mean, but the thing is, like, unless you externalize this and shared language that you can point to, you can pretend that you've empathized all day long, but at the end of the day, there's a good chance that you didn't, because you just sort of like glossed over something. I mean, because that to me is like the difference between sympathy and empathy. Is like you look at somebody crying and go like, oh, that must be sad.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, really? I mean, is that what that person is really feeling? Just because that person is crying? I mean, well, if you go and say like, are you sad? And that person says yes, and you're like, see, I told you, I empathize. Like, no. You just asked that question and somebody said sad. That doesn't mean that person is, do you know what the word sad means to that person? Like, unless you go deeper and deeper and deeper, it's unlikely that you've actually empathized. Because you sort of stop and where you think you've understood and sort of like leave it at that. It feels nice, like, oh, see, I've done something good or something. But no, like what like it's just like what Sherry said. There's always a transformative quality at the end of an empathic session, because when you dig deep in, you reach a point of like truth is like a big word, but if I use the word honesty, like there's like an honest core at the end of the day that it's so difficult not to resonate with after you've done that sort of empathizing. And when that honesty bubbles up to the surface, you really feel it, and you're like, oh, and that other person also feels like finally understood, and it's trying to get to that core somehow.
Yeah,
and it's difficult to do in 1 hour session with like 4 people, but if each panel is looked at as one step further along the line, and by the end of this 1 year long panel, if we get to some core nugget of honest truth, not as in like answer to life or something, but
shared experience. It's like one moment is shared experience. We've really done something, of a larger shared experience.
Yeah, exactly. Then people can go like, you know what, we've actually achieved. I mean, number one, we've actually empathized, which is a hard task in and of itself, of trying to empathize with, I don't know, 100 people or something in a series of panels. The other thing is we have a model that 100 people can point to and say, yes, that's what we're trying to say, and then sort of like use that as a way to, all right, now that we have 100 people who share this, it's quite likely that 1,000 people can look at this thing that 100 people have come up with and resonate deeply in an honest way. Nothing is to prevent you from imagining that 1 million people would probably resonate with it. I mean, like, the more you sort of like, the more resolution, the more fine sculpting you can do, the better it is. But at the end of a 1 year panel session, I'm relatively convinced that we can achieve a fairly high fidelity core of honesty through this kind of modeling. But I think it's important that we somehow inject the kind of modeling exercise into each panel, because to say that, okay, now that we've done a panel, somebody, write this down, somebody do this as a homework, it's just unrealistic. I think,
there's some kind of a resistance. I can feel the resistance to it. It feels like too much work for people.
And I think it is, because it's hard enough to do it in the moment when you're really wrestling with it. And when the energy is lost, because the energy is in the moment. It's like you give trust. You give enough trust to the other person that you're letting other person into your own ways of feeling. That's already hard to do, and you do that, and the other person reciprocates by saying, "Oh, I think what you're saying is this," and it's that feedback that keeps you going. But when you're doing this alone, there is none of that feedback. I mean, if there is, it's the kind of feedback artists use, which is like the material and you having that empathic conversation. But that takes a lot of training. I mean, like, that's what artists spend their entire lives, even if they don't have somebody patting you on the back saying, great job, like, this is amazing artwork. No, more often than not, people are saying, no, this is horrible art. Your art is crap or something. Yet they have to figure out a way to get the energy from the material. They have to empathize with that, because otherwise they would get depressed, which again a lot of artists do, and they kill themselves because it's such a difficult thing to do. But the panel is a different kind of medium, because we have people having conversation with people, and not just any people who are interested in the same subject, simply have different opinions, different perspectives. Maybe they use the same words to mean different things, but they're not trying to hurt each other, which is a big thing. They're giving their trust, and they're getting trust back. So to use that energy to build this model in real time, I think is not only far more effective and efficient, but realistic, as opposed to expecting somebody to try and get the energy rolling on their own outside this panel.
Well, I find this very exciting to have all your design experience and all that kind of come in. So I'm like thrilled about this. You know?
I hope this is helpful. I mean, I felt really bad. Like, what kind of feedback is useful, or am I going too overboard in like thinking about these things, or?
No, this is wonderful. I really feel it. I really see it, and it really resonates with my kind of way of seeing things. And you need kind of like the ideas and the skills and the experience to kind of set this up. And it's kind of like I see the larger vision of what you're talking about. The overall people coming together to have that deep sense of empathy with each other. And it's kind of a question of kind of how do you take the baby steps between here and there? How do you kind of break it down to kind of doable actions? It's like
and the two things that come to mind again are, number one, how do you bring listening into this online medium? And again, when I say listening, I mean listening actively, really asking the questions, because to me, if you remember from the presentation I did, listening is really an active act to me. It's not just like sitting there and hearing somebody's talk, but paying attention to every word that person is saying, and then the moment you find like even the smidgen of unclarity or doubt or anything, you have to figure out a way to smoothly interrupt and make an attempt to understand. I mean, like if I use the example of the kind of woodworking metaphor, like the moment you hear like a sound from the wood that you've not heard before, you don't just go like, oh, whatever, and just move on. Like, no, you stop and say, huh, why did the wood make that sound? What did I just do with my tool that I haven't done in the past that made the wood sound that way? And you have to investigate that. And only if you investigate that, you actually get to the kernel of quote unquote honesty, that the wood is simply just saying things. And you realize, oh, you know what? And the temperature had changed, and then the sort of the way in which the wood are expanding or contracting, and then the way I hit it at this particular spot made this noise. That's really interesting. It's something I didn't know before, because now I understand a certain aspect of wood I didn't understand before. And maybe down the road I will be able to utilize this knowledge in saying, oh, what if I made an instrument out of wood that takes advantage of this particular physical property of wood? What could I make that I haven't made before, right? It actually helps you tell your story, because you're interested, like you as in like the artist is interested in making musical instruments, and wood is just being wood. And then the moment those two things connect, like you have a relationship that is very different from somebody who's like a passive listener and somebody who's just trying to say something and you don't get it. So that having that listening actively somehow imbued in the Skype session, and again, one approach is to have a dedicated facilitator who's trying to try to see if that somehow does it. I don't know, but it's a baby step forward.
But if it's a dedicated facilitator, they need to have those skills pretty, honed, right? It's not just anybody can be a dedicated facilitator. So,
right.
Kind of who is someone that kind of really can hold that. that deeply, right? There's a deep, can have
Yes.
that deep listening.
And I think if you've talked to many of these people, you probably have a sense of that. I mean, am I wrong?
Um, well, what did you think of Mutima? Because she's been doing. I mean, I pulled her into it. She was going to be like the dedicated person. Then I kind of pulled her into being part of the panel. So that was, I kind of disrupted that dedicated facilitator role with her. But
Sure,
she's
sure.
been
I
doing
mean,
diversity work and mediation and all this kind of stuff for like 20, 30 years. So I'm just wondering how it resonated with you is
well, I mean, it's super hard to just look at one video and know anything.
hmm
I mean, because I think the impression I got from the video was people don't know each other. Is that true?
Oh, we do. We've been kind of
Oh,
connecting.
you guys all know each
Yeah.
other. Okay. Or maybe the impression I got was people don't know each other. They're trying to be very cautious.
hmm
That's the feeling I got.
Oh, okay.
They're because like I mean it's a good thing in terms of like letting everybody speak and making sure that everybody is heard. Um, but then see like the fact that it wasn't until the very end when Sherry said the part about truth and empathy, that was like a really good moment because Sherry said that, and then Irene's like eyes opened up, and she was thinking, and she was like, oh, there's something really in here,
hmm
and like it's those moments that the facilitator is really bringing out because again, every time you get to the core of what somebody's trying to say, there's always a kernel of honesty, and that resonates with people in a very different way.
hmm
So like if we can have more of those moments, if the facilitator can really get more into what people are saying, so that they end up saying things that they didn't know they were going to say, but it really is what they're trying to say, the better it is. And if you've witnessed those situations in other contexts where certain people are moderating, to me that's a very good sign that the moderator is skilled at really drawing from other people what it is they're trying to say. Because it really is. I mean, have you ever had an experience where somebody said something and you said something in response and you're like, is that me talking? And you're like, wow, I didn't know I had that in me. Or
hmm
like, wow, like
It's like
I
so deep and so resonant. Yeah.
yeah,
Kind of.
you say things you didn't know you were going to say, and you're surprised at the fact that you said that because you're like, wow, that really helps me understand what I've been trying to say all along. I mean, that's the kind of um, listening that I'm talking about.
hmm
And so if you've had that experience when talking with somebody, I think to me, like, that's a great way to sort of gauge that, you know what, I really want this person to facilitate.
hmm
And maybe we don't have sufficient number of those people, and not all panels might be able to do it, but I think keeping that in the back of your mind
hmm
as you pick facilitators, I think is something worth sort of
Yeah, that's great.
pondering.
Well, you're going to be doing the panels, so you'll be
Yeah, yeah,
facilitating. So we can kind of try this. We can do multiple panels.
sure, sure.
I just did think of someone. There's a mediation center that I'm working with. Seeds. That's called Seeds, and they're just local. And one woman there, Barbara, I've had that sense with.
Ah,
It's like she's just so attuned, to kind of bringing people together like that.
yeah.
That so that's really good to start really, really honing in on who are those people that really have that capacity, and these people that wrote the book. They might as well, so I could maybe check with them.
Yeah, yeah.
The chicken, the soup, meeting soup or something. Let me see. Something soup. I can't remember. I'll find it though.
Yeah, and
But
the other thing is again to somehow figure out a way to have a documentarian that really 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 tries to model what people are saying.
do you know people like that? I mean, for your panel, I mean, seems like within the design school that would be That would be really, people within design school would have those skills.
Yeah, I mean, I can ask around, but probably like most of them are like during their finals week.
Oh,
But I mean, like we can try it. I mean, for the panel that we'll run, we can try it. I mean, do you feel comfortable at all with concept mapping things?
For me to do the mapping in the background, kind of, I
Yeah.
could give it a try. Yeah. Is it done on the computer or just on paper? That
I mean, whatever makes you feel comfortable. 'Cause
Uh-huh.
I mean, everybody would have a piece of paper that they would write on, and they would, put it up against the screen so you can see.
Oh, okay.
But then, like, it's up to you to integrate all those into a sort of a larger whole.
Oh, okay.
So whatever is
So,
I mean, if you want to
uh-huh.
literally have like a, big piece of paper, right next to you on a, one of those 3M things, like what are those things called, like a flip chart or
Uh-huh.
something.
Yeah.
And you're sort of like, going off and kind of integrating in and then bringing it back to this, the camera once in a while to show it. That's certainly one approach. If you want to use some kind of a software tool that you have found useful and share the screen on that, I don't know. Like, so whatever.
Yeah, I could. So for the panel that you're moderating, I could be the convener and kind of do the concept mapping, kind of
Yeah.
behind. That would be good. I'd do that.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, everybody will be helping out. We'd be like,
Uh-huh.
no, that's not what I mean. What I really mean is that this is related to that, and somebody will say, well, how does this relate to this?
Uh-huh.
So it's really a sort of an evolutionary process.
Uh-huh.
So that makes an interesting.
So do
way
you think, I mean, if it's me doing convening and concept mapping and you doing facilitation, then we just have 3 panelists. You think that's
Yes.
enough for, I mean, that's a good amount for a...
I think so.
Uh-huh.
I think so. Because like even when we had the 3 people in the previous one, that was a pretty rich conversation.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I almost feel like we should try with that, and then just see how much chaos comes from just having 3.
Yeah.
And we're like, I'm asking questions, and you're trying to concept map, and sort of like go from there without trying to be too overly ambitious about it.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that. Yeah, that sounds good. I would probably just start with a pad and paper here.
Yeah.
Unless you're. I mean, yeah, that would probably be best for at least to start with. We can keep, we can do multiple panels. Just keep kind of refining this. I mean, this is actually could be a whole genre in itself of developing kind of like these type of panels, this type of discussion
Yes.
online. So I mean,
Yes.
this is like could be the beginning of a huge. Process that takes. I mean, just keeps evolving and.
I think so, because it's difficult to do this online as it is. So we have to, take our duct tape and be a MacGyver.
That's it. It's a duct tape kind of approach, and slowly the tools can get refined, though, too.
Yeah.
And then
because again, like in any art or design context, we always start sketching. Like there's no like. We don't right away start with the most expensive wood and sort of like go home. Like no, we buy basswood or poplar, and we just like shred it into pieces. Just chop it in and say, do we really want it this big or like? And then only when we have a structural model that we feel pretty good about, and it only says like, well, the only problem with this is that since it's poplar, it dings a lot or something.
Uh-huh.
And then we say, like, well, maybe we really need cherry or we need mahogany or something. And then we sort of go up and up and up. We have to start with a duct tape because otherwise it's number one, it's too expensive, it takes too long, and it actually hampers the process because we're so concerned about these precious materials or highly technical skills that we need to craft some of these sophisticated materials.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, with the concept mapping, I tend to do a lot of writing because I have a lot of space, like dual monitors, and not everyone has that, so a lot of people are just kind of pretty much stuck on their small screens when they're doing Skype.
Sure.
So that's kind of like one kind of aspect to it, and the other is I thought, well, I should just start right now as we're talking to do the concept mapping. Yeah.
you have, I mean, if you want to, I mean, I don't know if you're having any other interviews or online chats with other people between now and a couple of weeks, but if you want to just try it out, and sort of maybe reflect on the experience, and we can talk about it again. To sort of get your thoughts on what it felt like. You know, did it bother you? Was it overwhelming, or whatever the feeling may be? Because it might be too hard to just dive in cold turkey for the panel and just like, you know, try it, because that puts a lot of pressure on you.
Yeah, it takes my eyes off the screen. If I'm writing here, I'm seeing, for example, there are things I have terrible handwriting. I might have to do a computer approach in terms of handwriting for.
I mean, you can certainly. I mean, do you know? Do you know of a program called OmniGraffle?
No.
Oh, do you use a Mac or a PC?
PC.
Ah, okay. That might not work. Oh, maybe there is OmniGraffle for the PC.
There's various kind of like mind mapping software out there. I mean, it's similar to that.
Yeah, I mean, the main difference is that you have to be able to specify the relationship. It's not just an arrow, but what kind of an arrow is it? So if whatever software that you have, that you can quickly type and just like, you know, draw lines from one to another, and then, you know, double click on the arrow or something and says, you know, is or a component of some of those things. If you find something like that you can use, some kind of a diagramming tool that's quick, legible, and easily shareable, that might be a fantastic tool. Visio, that's another tool. Visio might do something like that.
And I think I have that.
Whatever you feel comfortable with. And I'd be more than happy to give you feedback on whatever diagram that you produce, to sort of see like if there are other techniques that we can use to make the real-time diagramming experience more coherent.
Okay, so what we have here is dedicated facilitator and the dedicated documentation kind of
documentarian, right?
Documentarian.
But also to like just for the record, it's important to note the whys. Like the whys for the dedicated facilitator is because it's difficult to listen actively online, and having a person who's dedicated for that role is probably a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because
it's very difficult for everybody to be paying attention to the subtle cues online, because number one, it's very difficult to sense those right moments to interrupt smoothly, and also it's very difficult because there's like a split-second lag between the communication. By the time you interrupt, that person has gone on to the second sentence, and you feel bad. That person might have lost their train of thought. So there's like issues with real time. So somebody's going to be like having a thick skin and say, you know what, I'm not going to apologize for sort of, you know, listening actively and asking these questions. It's going to be my role to do that, and everybody else can be less burdened by that, because I'm the one who takes burden.
Well, I found Google Docs really handy in the sense that while I was listening to people, if I had an idea, I would write it down.
Sure.
And it was that component of knowing that my idea was going to be physically represented somewhere and kind of externalized that was very kind of gratifying.
Yeah, I mean, like, because you can do basically exactly that, but just using this diagramming technique. Whenever you're drawing the diagram, if you have an idea that you believe is not yet discussed, just draw it in. Just make sure you relate it to whatever is already on the page, right? So instead of just putting out an idea in a void, which might distract from the current thread, but put the idea in and sort of like draw a line from that idea to the other concepts. So you relate the idea you just thought of into the context. And then that actually helps other people think of other things that are related to that.
So it's really, it's like getting the ideas, and really the types of relationships is really what you're kind of like focusing on into.
Yes, the relationships, the disparate ideas. Because unless all the ideas come together and form a coherent whole, it's very difficult to see the big picture. Like I see a bunch of, it's like seeing the stars is one thing, but then you see constellations and go like, oh, that's what it is. Like I see a horse, or I see a minotaur, or like it's a very different sort of way of seeing. That's a layer above just the stars.
Yeah. And
it provides an extra layer of meaning, I guess.
Yeah, and how to make it engaging so that people are engaged with it is the other question.
They can act on it.
Yeah.
Which is the next step. Because if they can't relate it, they don't know exactly what to do with it. I mean, they go like, oh, that's an interesting idea. Not sure what to do about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, put it there, which is fine, but at some point in time, it has to somehow come back in. So it's not to throw away ideas, but to be very diligent about relating the ideas.
Okay, so it's having a dedicated documentarian, but also each person can also be having a sketch pad too.
Yes.
Everybody can be encouraged to have their own sketch pad as well.
I think it's prerequisite. Make it a requirement. Because I mean, speaking is one thing, but then when you draw it out, there's something about the commitment to actually put something on ink. Makes you think one more time more clearly about what it is that you're trying to convey, and then the moment you put it out and other people are going to see it, that's a sort of an act of its own of empathizing with yourself. Because it's kind of like how I mean, you've probably felt this before when you're writing essays or something. It's one thing to have a bunch of ideas in your head, and you're like, oh yeah, I have an idea, I want to say something. It's quite another to actually start writing.
Yeah.
The moment you start to put words that you see in front of you that speaks back to you, there's that feedback of that externalization that you're trying to empathize with the meaning of the words, and in turn you're trying to empathize with what it is you're trying to say, and it changes what you put down. And once you're done writing, you actually have a much better understanding of what it was that you were trying to say than when you started. But you would have sworn to God that, like, in the beginning you had a very clear idea of what it was that you're trying to say. But when you're done writing, you're like, you know what? I didn't really have a clear idea of what I was trying to say, but now I do, because I've written it down. That process actually helped you understand yourself. I think it's that same thing, except that we're doing it, split into multiple people.
Yeah. So there's here's a video, the World Cafe, which this reminds me a lot of, and I had thought of the whole process being sort of like a large World Cafe. In because they're using a lot of the concepts of really try to get your ideas down on paper and draw them out, and they're also creating a kind of a positive environment, so that the environment itself is kind of uplifting and.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, definitely. Okay. So is that useful, helpful?
Yeah, it was immensely. I thought it was I'm really excited about trying all these ideas out and kind of building on them, and we could think about I talked with, like I mentioned, with maybe there's some way we could even be a team on this in terms of doing some of these panels, like taking the different roles and like I was just talking yesterday with George Lakoff. I don't know him. He's
Oh
written.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, went by his office and mentioned this to him, and he was, interested in doing a panel. So I've got him and Marco Iacoboni, and so yeah, I wanted to do kind of just kind of do a bunch, like a month or so of kind of beginning workshops before kind of getting kind of the top tier of the academics and people like that kind of going. But if we can kind of get it refined, I think we could do some really interesting panels with some of these kind of top scientists and academics and all that. So
Yeah, absolutely.
and you've done
Yeah.
interviews too for your project. You interviewed a bunch of academics and
Well, I mean, I interviewed a child psychologist,
psychologists.
and yeah, and then basically I had a lot of conversations. It's like, there was only one formal interview, and then the conversations I had with different people, mostly my teachers, trying to sort of get their idea on what it is that they're bringing in, or their sort of mindsets in art education, basically. Yeah, I mean, like if you want me to be a facilitator on a different panel or something like that, yeah, I would have no problem volunteering.
Oh, great.
So let me know.
I recorded this. Is it okay if I put it online? I just thought, I'm trying to, may as well document it, and like we had our last conversation, I just put it online for.
Sure, sure. Yeah. And you mentioned George Lakoff. Did you interview him or?
Went to a restorative justice conference, and on the way I just stopped by his office at UC Berkeley. So I just said, hey, George, we're doing this conference, on Skype, want to take part, be a panel member. And said he just had surgery. He was kind of hobbling around, on his cane.
Oh, is he okay?
He seems to be okay. He's recovering. And he said, oh, okay, just send me an email. We'll kind of see about lining something up. So.
Interesting, because his book was one of the books I looked at when I was doing my research, where mathematics comes from.
Oh,
Because again, my sort of like, I guess my art, so to speak, is to figure out a way to bring the idea of empathic conversation into a design of a new kind of a computer, like not something that people just like click buttons and do these things. Which to me it doesn't really facilitate that the kind of empathy that people put into when they're making physical things, like for example a carpenter or something. So I'm kind of curious to speak to him at some point in time if you can introduce me to him.
Okay. I was going to do an interview with him and then do a panel, and then maybe can kind of get some kind of a connection, or maybe you could even do beyond the panel.
Oh, sure.
Like that, we could try. Once you kind of refine the concepts, but he's pretty busy, and I want to be sure that it all kind of runs really smoothly.
Yep.
And then if it works well with him, I mean he's really a voice with the progressive movement. It could really bring in something that we could really get out to the progressives to get them on board more.
Mm-hmm. All right, any other feedback that I can help you with?
I think this is a lot to start with. I think it's basically, let me just see. I mean, it's lining up facilitators and lining up dedicated documentarians. And yeah, I'll kind of look around, and if there's any people that there, you mentioned at the school or within the design community, seems like they would be naturals who've already been trained in thinking that way and working that way. but I can kind of start doing it too. Okay, yeah.
Sure.
Well, I thought this was really helpful. I'm really excited about it, and we'll try. How's your panel progressing?
Yeah, basically, so Laurie said she can do it.
Mm-hmm.
The child psychologist actually said he could do it.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't have Skype,
Mm-hmm.
and he's not as computer savvy as he could be. So I'm going to sort of walk him through how to get that rolling. David is the one that's he's extremely busy because I don't know if you've heard the news at Cooper Union. There was a big uproar because they're trying to charge tuition. Cooper Union is a school that has been free. It's a university that's been free for basically its entire history, I think. Maybe the first couple of years or so there were some funding issues that had to be resolved, but it stood in for like the idea of free education and free speech for pretty much its entire history. And Abraham Lincoln, I think, was one of the guys who talked there when he was alive, and talked about these ideas of free speech in that very place. So it has a lot of sort of historical significance in America as standing in for free speech and free education.
It's a real symbol.
Yeah, this is a big deal because they're now trying to charge tuition. So he's heavily involved in trying to fight against that. So he's been kind of preoccupied with that a little bit. So I'm being a little cautious of not overburdening him with hey, are you good with this or not? But I'm probably gonna get a chance to briefly see him next week or something like that. So I'll remind him about that. So yeah, once he gets on board, I think we're good to go.
Okay, good. Yeah, and any other thoughts? Just send them my way, and really, yeah, this is exciting to bring in that creativity. I mean, that's kind of it's kind of like the first step, right? Once you start, that's what I was excited about with the last panel. It's like, okay, it's like 4 weeks ago, decided to do this conference, we're doing it,
yeah.
And then it's like, you start, it can be a bit rough and it just keeps refining, where it's kind of like that dialogue that you're talking about, where it's, at least the dialogue is started and now we're having this dialogue and that feels good. So it feels like the ball is rolling. I have posed a question. I'm kind of curious of what people think of the overall question, like how do we build a culture of empathy? For me, that really resonates. I'm just wondering how that is at least as a starting point. Like for you, how does that resonate?
Well, I mean, the first, the part that's weird about how I think is that I was trained as a computer scientist. and I spent most of my life doing that. Right? And then in the past 3 years, I went through art school. So like there is an analytic part of me that responds to questions like that, and it's like this other side of me that responds to questions. It's kind of like a mixed feeling. So I always feel like I have to qualify which part of me is responding to the question in which way. So like the first part of me, which is the analytical part, responds to that question and goes like, "Oh my God, that's a huge question. Know where to begin? Do we know what it means to build a culture of empathy? Do people really understand what that question even means? How do we define culture? Let alone a culture of empathy? When you say build, the first images that come to my mind is, are we talking about just having group sessions, or are we talking about like a physical building, or a lot of these questions sort of flowing in my mind, right? So it's so overwhelming that the analytical part of me stops and says like, I don't understand what the question means. But then the more sort of the less analytical and more sort of just kind of like taking in as it is side of me deeply resonates with that question, because again, empathy is something that I have a huge amount of emotional investment in. Having written a really long book and spent all that energy into it, sort of has a deep sort of resonance in somebody else finding empathy to be an important subject. Right? That's in and of itself as a huge validation. I'm not alone. I mean, which is,
Mm-hmm.
it seems to be a big recurring topic, because whenever I give a talk to students about my topic, the biggest thing that I always hear is, I thought I was the only one who thought making was this.
Mm.
It's not that this is like some brand new, like amazing, exciting idea that nobody has ever thought of, which I don't even know if such an idea ever exists. But then the more important aspect is somebody would come up and thank me because they feel like I've spoken on their behalf.
Mm-hmm.
Feelings they've had about what making means to them. Because a lot of times people feel insecure that, oh my God, art is so self-indulgent. You know, I'm such a selfish person. I shouldn't be doing this. And they kill themselves over this. When in fact, no, I don't think art is selfish at all. Or what does it even mean to be selfish? You know, you trying really hard to understand your feelings, and you've recognized the fact that the only way you can understand your own feelings is by understanding other, like not just other people's feelings, but other materials' feelings, other ideas' feelings, other fellow collaborators' feelings. Like for example, actors are going through this very in a very visceral way. People who are doing carpentry are going through maybe a more mediated approach, but by and large, other people are always somehow involved in art making. Other materials are always somehow involved in art making. The whole process is not selfish, but it's only selfish when you think of it that way, and you frame it that way, and you blame yourself. I mean, there's kind of a shame that a lot of artists feel because of this, and it puts them in a very dark place, and it ends up killing them a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like if some people are interested in empathy, and we look at somebody like blame themselves, labeling themselves selfish, and they end up killing themselves, I'm not sure if that's something we want. I'm not convinced at all that's what we want, right? So when I give this talk and somebody comes up to me and says, "Thank you so much for speaking on my behalf," that they almost look at as a defense for art. Although I don't intend it to be a defense for art. I just think art is just undervalued or misunderstood. But again, I'm trying to empathize with art as an idea, but then when I do that, I incorporate my own experience as a person and other people's experience as a person. And when I tell that story, other artists come up to me and they express their resonance. Right? So it's these occurrences where I feel there is a huge amount of interest or desire to understand empathy, but people either don't know the word, or people misunderstand the word, or people are too ashamed of what it is that they're doing. They don't consider it an empathic endeavor.
Mm.
They consider it selfish or self-indulgent. They put a lot of sort of shameful words in association with it, and they shut down.
There's something, yeah, I see this shutting down. There's something, if I look out over American culture, it seems like, you know, in relation to empathy, it's almost as if there's like a mysticism, that empathy is in this mystical realm,
Yeah.
and there's not a vocabulary for it. And there's it's just like a sadness about it, that it's like, I feel like there needs to be a vocabulary to somehow integrate it with the rest of ourselves. It's maybe
Yes.
it's maybe like George Lakoff's work. You know, he's written about that Enlightenment reasoning is one of the problems in our society, that Enlightenment reasoning says we're basically greedy, selfish, self-centered beings at our core, and that's a truth.
Yep.
And so people have kind of like bought into it, viscerally bought into it, but they know that that's not the truth, but they don't have the vocabulary for empathy and caring, and because it hasn't been they haven't integrated their felt experience maybe with their perspective, cognitive, that there's like a lack of integrity there, and so they're kind of like messed up, you know, and
A giant ball of misunderstanding.
yeah.
I mean, which comes from a lack of empathy.
Uh-huh.
I mean, when people are shut down, they feel shame, and they don't want to. They feel misunderstood. They feel all sorts of bad thing and negative emotions are pent up. It's more the reason why others need to reach out and really say, no, 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 no. What you're feeling is normal given the circumstance in which you're acting. It's your environment is making you feel the way you feel, and you're reacting the way you are because you've conditioned by the environment to react that way. But it's only when a new language, I mean, just like we talked about this new shared language we're trying to build, a new language comes in and say, no, when I say the word empathy, what you're doing is empathy. Mm-hmm. And that, if and only if that happens, their understanding of the world changes, and they substitute this new meaning in their head, and their idea of what it means to empathize changes because it relates to what they've always been doing, which is art making. And then they feel like, oh, you mean this is not like a sin? This is not something horrible? So this is not something I should be ashamed of? That connection has to be made for them to be able to sort of have that energy and the kind of trust, like we talked about the panel giving and receiving trust, and the kind of energy that comes from that allows you to sustain the whole conversation. That has to happen for a lot of people, I think. Mm-hmm. Because when I remember, I think a lot of students I meet, at especially prestigious universities, have the same thing, even if they're not doing art. Like a lot of times they're put in the situation where they're going into law or pre-med or whatever they may be going in, not because they want to, but because they have to or they're told to. And they're not it's not in their heart. I mean, that maybe down the road they realize they really love practicing law or pre-med. That could very much be true. But a lot of times they feel put into this situation without their parents understanding what it is that they really want to do. And if there is that sort of lingering feeling inside you, probably emotionally you feel stressed, you feel ununderstood, but at the same time you're actually ashamed of feeling that way, because if you could look around the world and go like, oh well, clearly being a doctor is good or being a lawyer is the right thing to do. I should be ashamed of feeling that that's not a good thing to do, or I should be ashamed of not thanking my parents for sending me to a really prestigious university that cost them a lot of money. How dare I tell them this is not what I want to do? That's shame, right? You just can't. I mean, especially when you're 18 or 17, it's unthinkable, right? So even that idea of wanting to be understood is completely translated to shame, and it completely shuts them off, and they just simply go through the motions, and they end up and that actually hampers their ability to even like their major, because it's completely
it's like wanting to be heard, and kind of the wanting to be heard is like something that's selfish, and then it's like, oh, you shouldn't even be wanting and struggling to be heard. You should be suppressing yourself. So why? Yeah, and that we.
And some parents would outright say that to their kid, like oh, I'm sending you to this amazing university. I'm paying you this much money. How dare you, say that you don't want this, and you're spoiled. I mean, like there are a lot of different things that you can say to your kids that might hurt them, but you probably don't mean it that way. You probably mean you say this because you want the best for them, but the dialogue isn't happening in a way that they feel they understand why your parents are saying that to them. That's not ever discussed. The only thing that's discussed is what they're saying, and you hear them the way you hear them, and you digest it as you think they're supposed to be digested, which is like this command coming from top down, saying this is the only way, and you got to figure out a way to be happy with this or something like that. But there isn't a sort of a conversation that happens that helps each other understand, well, why is my parents saying this to me? Well, why is my kid not, responding in a positive way to such an amazing opportunity I'm giving him to go to this prestigious university and potentially become a doctor?
Yeah, the kids don't see maybe the fear and anxiety within the parents who who are feeling, maybe insecure about life and know the difficulties of life, and
Oh yes.
and they don't feel that fear, the essence of the fear, and maybe the parents are saying, well, there's this fear, we got to shut down our feelings and kind of charge ahead with this with this plan or this structure or something. This structure is going to give us is going to control the fear.
Right. I mean, because our basic instinct is if we can control it, then there is no risk. Whereas controlling something doesn't necessarily mean there's no risk. It gives you the illusion, potentially, that there is less risk or something like that. But when you try to control, what it does, it basically filters out any opportunity for discovery, which is something that happens on a person-to-person basis. I can't discover for you, right? That's simply impossible. Like, unless you experience it yourself, you're never going to understand. Unless you have your own kid and go through that experience, it's very difficult to empathize with what the parents are going through when they said the things that they said to their parents, and like it's one of those things. The way I've sort of understood this is sort of like you sort of live your life, and then you come up with all these events that happen, and you're like, oh, if I had only done this, I wouldn't have been hurt, or I wouldn't have experienced this horrible thing. So you keep a record of all these things that you would like to your kids not to do, and then when you finally have kids, you're so excited, like, I have all the answers. I'm gonna tell them exactly what not to do, and then it's gonna be a fantastic life, which doesn't always happen.
I'm gonna call. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I thought I'm on a.
Oh, I thought you were done.
No, we're still here. So.
Oh,
I have the earphones. She doesn't hear it. She didn't realize I was on a call.
Right. So a lot of that dialogue doesn't happen, which only shuts people down and feel shame. I think a lot of this is sort of resonant to a lot of people because they're bottling it up and thinking about it as shame, as opposed to something they need to figure out and they need to sort of unsurface and experiment and play with.
Yeah. Well, when society is telling you that selfishness is the foundational value, I mean, it does create a lot of contortions within the mind and experience, and I think that's where the whole part of just that people need to be heard is this. If that kind of comes up, right, in terms of is a core value that everybody needs to be heard, and that hearing in itself is kind of what releases the energy for problem solving, for movement, and so
absolutely.
Well, it seems like we've done almost we could kind of go on for quite a while here, but. And so I've recorded this. I'll put it up online too. So
sure.
We'll have. So yeah, I'm really excited about our next panel. So, and anytime you have a comment, just let me know. We can have a Skype call.
Sure, we'll do. And try out the concept mapping for yourself, and let me know how it goes.
Yeah, so one thing I really is like all these. See, like we've had all these ideas and kind of a discussion here, is somehow to have it in a text format again is exactly what we were talking about, right? It would be great to have that, to make it accessible. It's hard for someone to go into a video and go into an hour video, and so
it's very difficult. I mean,
it's a little,
I think one would much rather have this sort of diagrammatic view of the whole big picture. And then if they want to understand what somebody said about this, like you can imagine, in the future, there's like this giant wall of evolving diagrams, right? And then you see a concept, and you see a relationship between a concept and another concept that you find fascinating, and you somehow drill into that idea, and then from there you can go into like a midpoint of a video, and this is exactly where the idea came about. And there are other videos, exact moments where this idea was once again resurfaced. So you get like a rich context where this came from. But the diagram becomes an entry point into those stories, as opposed to you being bombarded with hours and hours of stories to sort through before you get to, you know, the gist of it.
Yeah, it's all the work of creating that environment. It's a lot of work to conceptualize it as well as to make it doable.
Right.
So
right.
I think that's where we kind of are, is how do we start creating that environment.
And let's start with the simple concept maps and see how far it takes us, and then solve it from there.
Okay. So do you feel complete and heard?
I think so. Let's talk on and on and on.
Well, we have a whole year for this.
Yes, we do. So so let me know whenever you try concept mapping how you feel about it. And if you need an extra facilitator for another panel, let me know about that as well.
Okay, great.
And I'll update you on how it goes with my talk with David and to get his confirmation on the dates.
Okay, great.
Alrighty.
This is fantastic. Okay, talk to you later then. Thanks for the call. Bye.
Bye-bye.